this is every Colossal Sword ranked. In a non-Texas accent. Yeah, I'm sorry about that.
Number 16 is the Troll Knight Sword, which is a little bit troll because you never know if someone is using this weapon or its twin, Moonrithill's Knight Sword. They're equivalent in every way besides the weapon skill. The Troll Knight Sword, of course, has the Troll's Roar, which has an initial AoE scream that does an insane 40 stance damage on a close-ranged hit and 9 if you get hit just on the edge. The follow-up attack is a bit more difficult to land on bosses, but does a whopping 36 stance damage with a Colossal Sword. And of course, it is a Roar, so you can combine it with a Roar Medallion and the Highland Axe to make that damage really something to yell about. It's also in a 3-way tie for the 3rd highest attack rating in its class, and blessed with a tasty Pierce Heavy attack for some nasty counterattacks. Just don't forget that the Troll's Roar is an infusible Ash of War, which can literally cuck the Troll Knight Sword with a longer and stronger sword, maybe with a cold infusion for good measure, meaning that this weapon's use is basically limited to players that enjoy the Troll's Roar and want to use a magic infusion. There's nothing wrong with that, but there are stronger options, like Moonshine. Drink responsibly. Number 15 and 14 are the Greatswords of Radahn. When I finally felled that putrid boss, I was initially excited seeing 2 different Colossal Swords in the rewards. Lo and behold, they are both exactly the same besides the weapon skill. And I'll be honest, that turned me into the freaking Joker, baby. Just consider how nice it would have been to maybe have a different light attack combo. Maybe with an unnerved cross chop, because you get what you fucking deserve. But it's fine, because the dual Colossal Sword moveset is extremely powerful and craps on a lot of enemies pretty much instantly. Of course, if the enemy survives, your attack speed and recovery time are depressingly slow, and the roll attack goes from S+ God tier to D- dog shit. For the weapon skills, Lightspeed Slash has been recently buffed in patch 1.13 to include attack damage and scaling in its damage calculation. Why did it ship like this on the endgame boss weapon? Beats me. But it also does 20 stance damage uncharged and 32 stance damage fully charged. The slower speed though makes it difficult to use against bosses without getting slapped. And talking about difficult to use against bosses, we have the Promise Consort weapon skill. The full combo does good damage, 52 stance damage, and can stunlock almost every staggerable enemy. Against bosses that aren't staggerable, it's advisable to just use the first attack. The issue being, this only does 15 stance damage, and in most situations, you could just easily use a jump attack for similar damage and 29 stance damage. Number 13 is Moonrithill's Knight Sword. As a poser and a faker, I draw some kinship with this sword. It has all the benefits of the Troll Knight Sword, high attack rating, Pierce Heavy attack, looks cool as hell, but this time the Ash of War has a lot more use cases. The initial activation summons 3 glint blades that each do 8 stance damage, with the follow-up being a stab that puts you in a position for all 3 swords to hit their target. Although this weapon skill is kind of clunky in context. Sure, it's a cheaper version of the Great Blade Phalanx that does equivalent damage for a little less stance damage. That part is great. But to activate the stab attack, you need to summon the glint blades first. This essentially gives the stab a painful startup animation, and means that the main use of this weapon is going to be summoning glint blades. Because of the downtime in boss fights, this still makes the weapon good, but less usable than it first appears. Number 12 is the Royal Greatsword. As far as trinkets from corpses of theoretical best friends go, this one is not too bad. It has pretty equivalent attack rating to the carrying Colossal Swords, and has the highest damage charge attack variation among Colossal Swords. This weapon's base damages are also very high, and if you just have the base stats to equip it, it's straight up gonna be your highest damaging Colossal Sword. Its weapon skill applies a total of 160 frost buildup. That does mean that one normal attack from a regular cold infused Colossal Sword will have more frost buildup. But this weapon works off the rule of cool, which probably adds like 200,000 more frost buildup. No, not really. Anyway, the weapon skill does do good damage, around 20.5 stance damage, and gives you some nice forward momentum. The weapon itself also has a near 50-50 magic damage split, meaning it'll get more damage from magic damage increases than every other unique Colossal Sword. But the high magic split can also be a good or bad thing depending on what enemy you're facing. Number 11 is the Grafted Blade Greatsword. This sword doesn't play games, especially when it comes to games regarding thrones. Okay, Okay, I'm sorry. In a sense, this is the definitive support Colossal Sword. If you lack stats, but have extra weight capacity, consider equipping this weapon for the insane buff it gives you. For just 20 FP, you get tons of poise for 5 seconds and +5 to all stats for 60 seconds. On top of that, it's an amazing weapon just by itself. It gets the highest physical attack rating among Colossal Swords, and it's literally made of swords, so that has to count for something. Sure, because of soft caps for stats, the weapon becomes way less beneficial later in the game, but the weapon itself is good enough to carry you to that point, where you can haplessly abandon it just like the heartless monster you are. My recommendation would be to power stance this weapon with another heavy infused Colossal Sword. The extra weight, FP, HP, and damage you can get from the stat bonuses are pretty key there. Not to mention that the poise buff turns you into a human Beyblade. Number 10 is the Troll's Golden Sword. This weapon is the gold flake chocolate of Colossal Swords, in that I have no idea how it tastes, but I'm pretty sure it's a scam. On every infusion besides poison, blood, cold, or occult, it's near the bottom. But for those 4 infusions, it's golden, with a close second to third place in attack rating. So if there's a status infusion on this weapon, it's probably going to perform. To add on, it's got the highest damage variation of the charged heavy, but it doesn't help that the sword is giving 511 vibes, being the 4th shortest Colossal Sword in the game. But that's okay, because we practice acceptance around here. And the weapon is also very easy to acquire, being in the open world carriage chest right past the Erd Tree Grazing Hill Grace. I would say it's a strong option if you don't have many or want to use status effects. Number 9 is the Ruins Greatsword. As the giant statue sword for Elden Ring, this weapon has a lot of expectations. But does it meet them? Oh yeah. The weapon skill not only does good damage, it's fast, extremely long range, and AoE. It scales primarily with weapon levels, which is a good thing while you're upgrading the weapon, but may cap the damage a bit low. Regarding the weapon itself, it's the best muscle wizard weapon in the game, with its S scaling at strength and low 16-int requirement. If you're just leveling strength, this weapon will get the highest attack rating out of every Colossal Sword. As you level up other damaging stats, other weapons do catch up though. And sure, it has a massive 50 strength requirement, but that's only 34 strength if you two-handed. The charged heavy also creates some rocks as you smash the ground, but there's 2 problems with this. First, the heavy attack itself is nerfed to compensate for the damage the rocks do, even the uncharged version that doesn't summon any rocks. Second, the rocks don't get any bonuses from boosts to charged heavy attacks. It's also the 2nd shortest Colossal Sword in the game, right in front of number 8, the Starscourge Greatsword. Ah, the original Greatswords of Radahn. If only we knew how good things really were. It demolishes most enemies at the time that you get it, and let's be honest, throughout the entire game. And the weapon skill really complements that, by pulling everyone to you and then smashing them like dirt. Subtler applications might include ripping birds out of the sky or making short work of the skulls on a mausoleum's leg. It also has a hidden damage reduction when you activate it. That means you can tank through most attacks and return a massive smash that by itself outdamages the bulk of weapon skills. Unfortunately, the weapon does have some drawbacks. As I alluded to earlier, it is the shortest Colossal Sword, and the weapon skill, much like Riz, can be pretty difficult to get off versus certain bosses. While it does have higher damage than the Terrible Duo, it still suffers from the poop heavy attack and rolling attack that paired Colossal Swords have. It also theoretically has the highest strength requirement, since you can't two-hand it. Number 7 is the Watchdog's Greatsword. This is a very solid sword, is what I would say if I didn't just spend 3 hours farming it. It only drops from these Greatsword Watchdogs, which can be found in the various catacombs around the mountaintop of the Giants and the consecrated snowfield. But is the damage worth it? It's 2nd to 3rd in most infusions, with the 1st place in magic. So maybe? It does score points for being absolutely beautiful to look at and sharing the highest damage variation of the heavy attack combo. But it's also the 4th shortest Colossal Sword, being around the same length as the Troll's Golden Sword. Overall, this weapon will perform slightly worse than the Greatsword in most aspects and be way harder to find, but it's still a good weapon in its own right. Number 6 is the Zweihander. The base cannon is back. this time with the base stab. While some other rude-ass sword has stolen most of the sword's thunder, it's still extremely useful. You can get it very early for cheap, and it has really low stat requirements for a Colossal sword. Even if it's at the bottom damage for most infusions, its main selling point is being the second longest Colossal sword with that tasty heavy attack. It's probably better to think of it more like a Colossal spear with a sweeping light attack. And if you're up for a good time, throw a cold infusion on this thing and fight Malenia. I guarantee it'll be as easy as Malenia can be. Number 5 is Maliketh's Black Blade. As the resident anime Black Blade of Death, yeah, it's good. It has amazing base damage, starting out at around the top when you have its required stats, and straight up gets the highest attack rating among Colossal swords as you acquire more stats. And that doesn't even count the goated weapon skill, which does good damage and applies destined death to any enemy it hits, reducing their HP by 10% flat out and doing about 2% of their HP over 2 seconds. This obviously does more damage the more HP the enemy has, so it's really strong against late game bosses. Any staggerable enemy will also be stun locked very easily, and it has a nice AoE as well. It only really suffers from dropping off the third to last Remembrance boss in the game, and the weapon skill being harder to use on faster bosses. Though it's very possible to just use the weapon skill at the beginning of the fight to shave off that 10% HP, and then swap to another weapon that might be more appropriate for the boss that you're fighting. Number 4 is the Godslayer's Greatsword, and god damn! RIP to the Lord, because this sword kicks ass across the board. Although it has less attack rating than Maliketh's Black Blade, it has a faster light attack moveset, which combos really well from the crouching attack or the running attack. The weapon skill not only craps out damage, but it also applies Black Flame, doing about 2.5% of the enemy's HP over 2 seconds. But that's not all. It's also one of the only weapon skills that you can backstep or roll out of, so you can use it liberally and without much room for enemies to punish you. On the downside, sure, it has a stance damage of 40 if all 3 attacks hit, but that's much easier to achieve with an Ash of War like Lion's Claw. Nonetheless, it's still extremely strong compared to other unique weapon skills. So all in all, this is a very safe sword, and if you're a god, you might want a safe word. Number 3 is the Ancient Meteoric or Greatsword. I would say this is probably the peak strength of a somber weapon. Sure, it can't be infused, but who cares? I'm Dante from Devil May Cry, and I can make you explode. Besides making you bust and killing people, this weapon does great damage with just its required stats, but with more stats can also get the second highest attack rating among Colossal swords. The weapon skill is fast, does great damage, and can be used in most situations without being punishable. The initial dash can be used as a gap closer or as a way to get away from enemies. It even has the god tier stab heavy attack, making it a veritable toolkit of murder that literally has everything going for it besides a status effect. Should it have a status effect? Yes, but it's also perfectly fine without one. Number 2 is the Fire Knight's Greatsword. This is the other rare drop Colossal sword, but this time it has a lot of unique aspects that make it completely worth wasting 5 hours of your life killing some random sword guys. To start, it has built-in fate scaling, along with inherent fire damage. This gives it a generally high total attack rating, but its physical damage is also strong. Combined with the semi-unique light attack from the Godslayer's Greatsword and the stab heavy attack, you pretty much have a straight upgrade to the Zweihander for almost every infusion besides blood and poison. If you're facing an enemy that is in any way weak to an element, especially fire, pull this monster out, because you're in for a good time and definitely not a long one. And number 1 is the Greatsword. Living up to its name, this is a great sword, but some would say it's too big to be called a sword. Massive, thick, heavy, and far too rough. Indeed, it's a heap of raw iron. Raw iron that will ether every enemy around you. On almost every infusion, this weapon is in the top 3 of the Colossal Sword category, which sure, there are only 5 infusible ones, but they usually have infusions they're pretty bad at. This one doesn't. So regular guy, Lion's Claw. Tree guy, Lion's Claw with a fire infusion. Dragon guy, do I even have to say it? It also comes with a unique heavy attack that sweeps all around you, combined with being the longest Colossal sword. All of this, on top of having the best bleed infusion in the category, allows you to happily erase most health bars in an instant. Just remember, once it's gone, it'll never go back to the way it was. Griffin!